Thank you. Okay, good morning and welcome to the Sarah Stevens Good Morning Forum. I am Mary Johnson. I'm a facilitator along with facilitators Laura McClady, Cornelia Ivory Candy, Jackie Walton Edwards, who was your gracious hostess, Winston Robinson. We have Steve Johnston over on the computer. He takes care of our website and email. And Sarita Sherrill, she is our chaplain. Our forum runs from 8:30 to 9:45, at which time we'll pause for announcements from the audience. And if you have any announcements, you can also send those to Steve at sjohnston@tuesdayforumcharlotte.org. We always begin with prayer, and can you just give us a moment?
Father, thank you for your so very many blessings. We ask that today as we go through being here for the Sarah Stevenson Tuesday Forum, that you give us even more mercy and more grace. And God, we just thank you this morning, God, for the attorneys, female attorneys who've practiced for a while. We just are interested in what they have to say and their experiences. We ask all these things in the name of the soon coming King. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you. Do we have any first timers this morning? Do we have, okay.
Everybody.
If you are a first timer, could you stand and introduce yourself?
Well, I'm not really a first timer. I'm just an old timer who's returning.
Okay.
Good morning. My name is Cheryl Sparkle Mosley, and I used to attend many years ago when it was at McDonald's. So that lets you know how long ago that's been. But I'm glad to be here this morning because my neighbor asked me to come in with her this morning, so I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Welcome and come back. And I do want to say that she is the guest of our nurse that was here last week, and she said to me, you all said each one bring one. So she came back today and she brought one. So thank you very much. Okay.
Good morning. My name is DJ Simmons. I'm actually a new reporter of Charlotte Observer, and I was meeting Mr. Winston last week. He mentioned the Tuesday Forum. He said it's a great opportunity to get out and meet the community. So make sure to stop by in the morning.
Okay, thank you so much, and come back. We need good guests. Okay. Okay. We also would like to ask you to silence your cell phones. Just put them on silent, and that would help us out a lot during our conversation. And I just want to say also that we do have a virtual audience. Okay, so everybody's not back in person yet, but we do have quite a few people on virtual, so you're speaking to a large audience. Okay, our guests today are lady attorneys, and they have been practicing or retired from practice for quite a while, and we are really excited. It's Women's International Month. Okay, so we are so honored to have you here with us. We have Alice Ritchie, Sandra Cummings, Cynthia Aziz, and we have Cindy Patton. And also, I think I see Ricky McCoy Mitchell in the back. Okay, and she's a retired judge, and she's an attorney too. So welcome, and if you'd like to join us, you can.
Well, I'm available. I just want to make sure you ask me additional.
Oh, okay.
But I'm here, and I am so thankful because I look forward to knowing each one of the panelists today.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, and thank you. Okay, so we're going to give them a chance to speak. Each one of you can speak for maybe 5 minutes or less, whatever. Just introduce yourself, tell what you did, and say whatever you would like to say. And then what we'll do, we'll take questions from the audience, okay? Because they will have questions of you. And if you'd like to just engage in a conversation, that's okay with each other, and we'll listen. Okay. because we had the nurses here last week and they had so much to say, you know. They hadn't seen each other in a very long time. So if you're in the audience, and this is especially for the people for the first time, you do raise your hand if you have a question, okay? You raise your hand, and I'll do the calling on, okay? I'll call on the hands, and then you can ask your question. If you have a second question, we can come back to you. But we ask you just to do one question at a time so that everybody will have a chance to ask their question, then you all can answer. Okay, Natalie is not here this morning, but she is our timekeeper, so I'm going to ask Laura to be our timekeeper, okay? So if you get too long, we'll call time on you. You and you, okay? We'll call time on you, but we don't want to rush you. Okay, so we're going to get started right here with Attorney Ritchie.
Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
It's very nice to be here and to be with everybody. My name is Alice Ritchie, and I was born at Presbyterian Hospital right here in Charlotte, so I am a native, along with probably some other folks around here. I graduated from West Charlotte High School in 1977, and then I went to a small school in Massachusetts for 2 years, came back to Chapel Hill, finished out there, worked for a little bit, and then I went to law school at Chapel Hill, and I graduated from law school in 1986. And then I came to Charlotte, back home, where I swore I'd never come back, and I did, and very glad I did. Charlotte obviously has changed a lot since I grew up, but it's changed, in my view, in really wonderful ways. And I have been practicing law for 37 years in Charlotte. I started with a law firm called Kennedy Covington, Lobdell and Hickman, which isn't around anymore because it merged with a big, giant national, international firm. So everybody left. And I'm now at a small firm called Alexander Ricks, about 35 of us, I guess. Until January of this year, I was a trial lawyer. I mostly represented businesses against other businesses, doing contracts, trade secrets, people not getting along and wanting a business divorce, copyright, trademark, just sort of things I really never thought I would do or understand, but really have loved it. As of January of this year, I stopped taking new cases. So all I'm doing now is I'm acting as a mediator and arbitrator. So now I'm spending all my time trying to stop people from going to court and get them to resolve their cases, which most resolve and most should resolve. Standing on principle is a great thing in theory, but if you actually have to go to court and do that, it often doesn't work out in quite the way you might want it to. The reason I think I became a lawyer is my dad was a lawyer in Charlotte with one other person. I always told him he was the Andy Griffith in the law practice in Charlotte, North Carolina, because he did everything. And was very genial about it. And I don't think I've ever met anybody who loved what he did more than my father. And he never told me to go to law school or said, oh, you ought to be a lawyer. It was just leading by example. And so when I went to college, I thought I was going to be a journalist. But there's some similarities between journalism and being a lawyer. So I discovered that being a lawyer allowed me to do the things I love to do, which were read, write, and talk. So that's what I've been really fortunate enough to do, and I do feel really, really lucky that I had the career and still have the career that I have. So
Thank you.
Okay, I'm Sandra Cummings. I basically was born in Cleveland, Ohio. My parents moved to Liberia when I was like 12 years old, and I was there for like 4 years. Basically, I came back to the States, went to a small school called Yankton College, Yankton, South Dakota. Went to UNC Law School and graduated from UNC Law School. Then I became a VISTA volunteer for a year in Alabama, doing land loss prevention. And I guess it's made me interested in trying to hold on to people's property, in the importance of holding on to property. So many people were losing their property as a result because people were not paying the taxes. And a lot of them had basically had these properties since slavery. And it was really tragic that a lot of these people were losing their properties. And so worked for land loss prevention, came back, bar exam, worked for legal aid for a couple of years, and then I went into private practice in 1982. And my husband retired in 1989, and we formed the law firm, Cummings Law Firm. I do bankruptcies and bankruptcy-related matters. And a lot of times people think, hey, when you're filing bankruptcy, you're really, really broke. Not really. Most of the clients I have are really like middle-class people who are trying to hold on to what they have. And we come up with strategies for them to hold on to what they have. If you really don't have anything, you really don't need to file bankruptcy. It's kind of a thing because, you can't get blood from a turnip. So I do bankruptcy and bankruptcy-related matters. My husband does Social Security, and he was a administrative judge for the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and so he does also EEOC matters in federal sector.
Thank you.
Sure.
Good morning. I'm Cynthia Aziz. I've been in Charlotte since 1988. I came from Massachusetts, originally from Maine, born in Maine, then lived in Rhode Island, and then North Carolina. What brought me to North Carolina is I wanted to practice immigration law, and that desire came from when I was pretty young. In New England, there's lots of immigration lawyers, and when I got out of law school in Boston, my mentors were saying, well, Cynthia, if you got a job offer in North Carolina, you'll be a big fish in a small pond. You stay here, you'll be a little tiny fish in a big pond of fish. So I said, wow, that's kind of a cool idea. So I came to North Carolina for that job offer in 1988, and I've been here ever since. I went to undergraduate at Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts, and then to New England School of Law in Boston. And it was a small law school, but it was a great law school. It was a working person's law school. We had people going to 5-year programs, and that was something that kind of impressed me my entire life. People were able to keep going on with their educations, even when they've had other careers. So, and I see that with my clients. What's drawn me to immigration law since I was young was the concept of reestablishing your life in a new place and how difficult that is, whether it's a new place in this country or a new place anywhere in the world. And it's not often by choice. It's often by circumstances that force someone into that. When you were just saying you're from Liberia, that's a country that I have many clients from, and the struggles of that country and the civil strife that has brought people here, and the difficulties of the people that arrive here, how long it takes for many of them to get legal status here, and yet they keep persevering. One of the things I do in my little bit of spare time is I tutor at an elementary school in Druid Hills, and there's across the corridor it says Persevere Avenue. And I always look at that with the little girl I tutor with, and I said, that's your message for life, perseverance. And I see that with my clients, where they're coming from, their patience and perseverance to get through the process, to get full rights, to live someplace safe and secure. So that's who I am. That's what I've been doing all these years. And it's been my own practice since 1990. When I originally arrived here, I worked for a firm, and then it wasn't a good landing, and then I went with another firm out of Greensboro called Booth Harrington Johns and Campbell. I operated their offices in Charlotte for a little over a year and a half, and then they decided they didn't want it anymore, so I purchased the assets for a small amount. I look back now, it was a big amount back then, and then went on my own, and I've been on my own since 1990, and don't yet have an escape plan.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Cindy Patton, and I did not grow up wanting to be a lawyer. I sort of fell into this profession. When I went to college, I wanted to be a clinical psychologist. I went to UNC Charlotte. I've been in the area all my life. I didn't grow up in Charlotte. I grew up in Concord, but been in the area all my life. Went to UNC Charlotte, loved studying psychology, rushed through college in 3.5 years, going in the summers. And when I finished college, I was burnt out. So I thought, let me just get a job and work for a while before I go back to graduate school. And I was fortunate enough at the time to get a job with an insurance company. They paid a lot of money. You know, I was a young person, had money in my pocket. They even gave me a company car. You know, so I was having a great time as a young person. But I quickly became disillusioned with the work because philosophically, their way of looking at the world was different than my way of looking at the world. So I started to doing things in the community, trying to figure out what will I do next, and started working with some grassroots organizations, and actually went out into the community and went to community education events and saw some legal aid lawyers. And I thought, wow, if lawyers can do that kind of work, maybe that's something I could do, because basically what they were doing is helping people, which was what I wanted to do with a psychology degree. So I started exploring that. Things started to fall into place. I went to UNC Chapel Hill, graduated in 1992, and was fortunate enough while I was in law school to clerk with Legal Services of Southern Piedmont for one summer, and was lucky enough to get offered a job by Legal Services when I graduated in 1992. And I have been doing that ever since. I worked as a staff attorney for a number of years at Legal Services of Southern Piedmont, was then promoted to managing attorney at Legal Services. And in 2002, the organization I work for now was created, Legal Aid of North Carolina. And it was created from a lot of the statewide programs across the state, became one organization. And a part of the staff at Legal Services of Southern Piedmont was cut off and became the Charlotte office of Legal Aid of North Carolina. And that's where I've been since 2002. I really love my work. I think it is a privilege to be able to help people who, but for you and your colleagues, would not have any help at all and would completely fall through the cracks. We do certain types of work. We focus on making sure people's basic human needs are met. So we have a large unit that's involved in housing work where we help people avoid eviction and hold on to their homes. We also have a large domestic violence unit where we help people get domestic violence protective orders to stay safe from their abusers. And we have a smaller consumer unit, which is the practice area that I focus in now. I've done all the practice areas, but currently I'm working in the consumer unit, and we help people, low-income people, can sometimes buy homes. And so sometimes they get in trouble with not being able to make those mortgage payments. So we focus quite a bit on helping people avoid foreclosure. We started doing this work primarily in 2008 when the housing market crashed and people started losing their homes. And we thought, well, this is something we really need to focus on, because it is one way that low-income people and Black people in particular can create family wealth, generational wealth. And if they can't hold on to their homes, you know, that's going to be something they're not going to be able to provide to their families long term. So we started focusing on that work, and we also help people with exemptions, which is another area that a lot of people don't know about. But if you are sued and someone gets a judgment, a money judgment against you, they can try to collect on that judgment. And before they can do that, they have to give you notice that that's what they're doing. You get an opportunity to protect some of your property under the law. And if you don't do that, people can have, the creditors can come take your property. And I have known that to happen. I had a young man once who actually lost his home because he didn't pay for the loan he had gotten on a motorcycle. And I just thought, losing a home as a result of a debt on a motorcycle, I mean, it's just awful. So that's another thing that we do in our consumer practice. And we also help people get unemployment compensation benefits, which was huge during the pandemic. So that's what I do at Legal Aid of North Carolina. I am about to wrap up my career at Legal Aid of North Carolina. And in fact, at the end of next month, we'll be retiring from the practice.
Wow. This is a wealth of knowledge up here. I mean, this is amazing. You all are amazing. Okay, you're just amazing. Okay, we do have a question, Ken.
I have a question for everybody, but yeah, I'm gonna just start. I'm gonna just start with you, because you didn't say who your dad was.
Oh, my dad's name was Cart Carmichael.
Art,
Cart, C-A-R-T.
short for Carter.
Cart, short for Cartwright.
Cartwright.
Carmichael, yes.
I used to cover the courts at some point in my life. I covered him and knew you. Your turn. You're new, and I've known you forever. It's really a pleasure to see all of you this morning. So I'll defer to my next question. Oh, the other question was that you were at West Charlotte. You
Yes.
came out in 76,
77.
77. Were you with Neil Williams?
Neil Williams?
Yes. He was the quarterback at West Charlotte.
Yes, I know who that is, but yes.
Okay.
But I think he was 76 maybe.
Okay.
But anyway, yes.
For historic purposes, Neil Williams was the first white quarterback at West Charlotte.
Well, it was a good football team.
Yes, it was.
That was great.
Okay. Okay, Laura.
This question is for Senator Cummings because she's been around for a while. I've been around for a while. She is still doing commercials on TV. Did y'all know that? No. Tell us about that. Your how that is benefiting you at this point in practice because I hear that I say she is still commercials. I just love it.
Okay, well, I basically, what we basically do is like a little bit like what Cindy was talking about in terms of trying to hold on to people's property. A lot of times, I can give you an example. I have a client who basically inherited his parents' house, which was paid for, and his two brothers also were his two brothers. I hear from them all the time because they wanted to sell the house, but he didn't want to leave the house, and so they assumed he was going to make the tax payments on the house, and then to take the taxes and insurance, but he wasn't doing either. And it was a very nice house over the Bahama Park. It's a very nice house in Bahama Park, but he wasn't paying anything. And they had told him that he had to pay the taxes, and so he shows up and he's like 6 years behind on taxes. And so and the tax man was about to take his house. And so what we did is we did basically a chapter 13 for him and basically set up a program for him to pay the taxes back, at the same time retain his house. And that's the kind of thing that we do. That's the kind of thing we do with bankruptcies and bankruptcy-related matters. We also, of course, we do sevens where people were just walking, they're having terrible problems. We had a lot of people with, I call medical bankruptcies, where people basically had like $150,000 worth of medical bills, and they just couldn't keep their middle-class lifestyles with that kind of money. There's constantly creditors contacting them about medical bills, all this, because, like they had something, like sometimes there was a lapse in insurance, sometimes sometimes it was a lapse in insurance, sometimes they never had insurance. And all of a sudden they had like a heart attack or stroke or something like that, and they were going to lose their home and stuff. I had a lady once where she basically rented a car as part of her job, and they asked her at the rental place, "Hey, do you have insurance?" And she said yes, but she only had liability at home. She didn't have collision. So anyway, she was in an accident, and as a result, she owed $2,000, and she couldn't pay it at the time, and so it kept on growing and growing and growing, and so it ended up being like $4,000. And they were basically they were going to sell her house in a sheriff's sale for the $4,000. It was a $250,000 house at the time, which was like 10 years ago. So it's a pretty nice house. and they were going to sell it. And so so a lot of times what we do is we set up a program so they could she could hold on to her house and straighten this whole situation out. And so that's the kind of thing we do.
And in your commercial, you have a commercial on?
Yeah, we do have a commercial on, I think on Praise.
I've heard it.
Yeah, on the Praise,
Radio.
yeah.
Okay,
Mhm.
okay, good. Okay, yes, Chris.
Good morning. Like, I guess preparing family papers, like getting things in order, as far as transfer of property, paying for death. What are the top, what's the difference between a trust and a will? As far as when it comes to probate.
Okay. Well, I'm not an expert on any of that. Like I said, I do bankruptcies and bankruptcy-related matters, but generally, a will is usually is effective at the time of death, where a trust can be effective like based on what the agreement was, or what the basically like whoever set up the trust and whoever's running taking care of the trust. In terms of sometimes the bank sometimes the bank, sometimes it's your law firm, and so a trust is set up for a certain purpose usually. It's usually set up by somebody. There's self-settled trust. There's all kinds of trusts. And like I said, I'm really not that. I'm not going to put myself out as being really familiar with all the kinds of trusts there are. There's and a lot of times they're basically set up while the person was living to basically explain how he wanted to divide the money up to, sometimes it's children. Sometimes they set up a trust because the kids are too young they felt the kids are too young to administer their own money. Sometimes they set it up because there's different reasons that people set up trust. Sometimes it's tax issues, and they try to protect the money from tax liability and things. So there's 100 reasons that people set up trusts, but a will is effective upon death, and it's not just because, like for instance, let's say that if you didn't die, then and you set up a will, the fact that you were going to get John to be executor of that will, and you're still living, it doesn't really the will is not effective until you're dead.
Does anybody else deal with trust?
I would do it in the dispute context, where someone's trying to get money out of a trust. And the one interesting thing about a trust is it will take money. Sandra set up a trust. The money she put into that trust or assets, a house, people put houses in trust, it's no longer hers. It belongs to the trust, and there's a trustee. And so if someone, a creditor, for example, is coming after money that's in a trust, I'm sure you've seen this, if it's what's called an irrevocable trust, which means it can't be modified, then the creditor can't get that. And so a lot of people do use it to protect assets. And on the death of whoever the person is that either put the money into the trust or is the beneficiary, the trust doesn't go through the court system. So the will goes through probate. The trust does not go through probate because it still lives on, assuming it's an irrevocable trust, which means it can't be modified. Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question for Cindy. In my background and experience with banks.
Is what? I'm sorry?
In my background and experience with banks is that they now charge, if you have a check, you write me a check, I go to Mechanics and Farmers to cash that check. It's a $35 check. And I go there to cash that check, and because I don't have an account there, and this was an actual experience, they charged me $25 to cash that check. That form of charging people who don't have accounts with banks went gangbusters once immigrants started a major influx. And my question is, has there ever been any lawsuit, class action or whatever against the banking industry in North Carolina that prohibits banks from charging you money because you wrote me, charging me money because you are their client. You got the $35 in your account and you're giving me the $35, but they say because I'm not a customer of theirs, they're going to take $25 of my money. And this goes across the board. I think Wachovia or Wells Fargo is about $8 or $7.50. And that began a proliferation of banks doing that once the influx of immigrants started, probably back in the 90s, and maybe a little bit before then. And it's basically a cash cow against a person's right to have his money from the bank, whose customer says, give this man $35. Any legal violence against that kind of practice?
I don't know if there's been an actual class lawsuit on it, but this issue came up, as you said, like in the late 80s and 90s. And it stemmed from something even bigger, which was for years in this country, people could work without having issues. Identity wasn't as big a problem as it's become. Getting work authorization as an immigrant, an intending immigrant, is very difficult. And if you don't have a work permit, you can't get proper IDs, you can't open a bank account, you can't get a driver's license, it goes on and on and on. And it became more difficult probably in the mid-80s. And that's when all this stuff started happening. Also, the banks found a way to make money off of it. And I think Bank of America was even encouraging immigrants to open their accounts there. So there were lots of problems. But does someone in the room know about the lawsuit? Because there have been challenges to this. I just not experienced personally with it. But it stems back to the problems with getting the identification for an immigrant.
Okay. You can come back. Laura.
Okay, my question is, and all of you attorneys, judges, whatever, I would like to hear from each one of you, as Sandra has expounded on some situations that she's had, but share with us situations that you would never forget that have occurred as you have been an attorney or in a position to help others. And I just want to hear a couple of things because I know Sandra. I know Sandra. I don't know any of the others, and I know some of the things that they've done, but I didn't know, I didn't know that's what she did, So if each one of you could just share us a couple of incidents or situations or clients that you've assisted and things that you would never forget. We like to hear stories.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just talk about my very first case, which I thought was a lot of fun, and it actually ended up being a fairly significant case. But I represented a young couple who lived in substandard housing. At that time, I was doing housing work, and I was helping people avoid eviction. And under North Carolina law, landlords are required to keep their rented properties up to safe, fit, and habitable conditions. So this young couple came to us with a home that was in terrible disrepair. And it was my very first case. My supervisor helped me, walk with me every step of the way because I was brand new. And we went into small claims court. I represented them and was actually able to get the eviction dismissed and even get them some rent abatement, because that's what landlords can be held to do if they don't keep the places up fit and habitable. The tenants can counterclaim against the landlords or even file affirmative claims saying, I've been paying too much, you owe me, I've paid more than this place is actually worth, and get money back. And so that's what we did in that case, and we were successful. And I will never forget, after court, the wife of the couple came to me and said, "Oh, Cindy, you're just the greatest attorney ever." And I remember chuckling, thinking, if only she knew this was my very first case. But that just goes to show too, though, that it really doesn't take a whole lot to make a big difference. I had help with me the entire way. And that particular case, the landlord, of course, was upset about it and actually appealed it. It was tried again in district court. The landlord appealed that because he lost again. And it actually went to the Court of Appeals. And some of my colleagues actually handled the Court of Appeals case. But that very first case that I took, being very, very new and just barely getting started in the practice, I was able to make a huge difference in those folks' lives. And that is one of the special things about doing the kind of work that I do, is that I can make that kind of impact.
I was going to mention that Cindy's Legal Services North Carolina also does immigration work related to domestic violence, women who've been, not just women, men too, that have been abused. And also they do some work with the unaccompanied minors, children's cases. So
Excuse me, can you talk up a little?
Pardon?
Can you speak up a little?
Sure. The type of work that I do also impacts what Legal Services does. If someone doesn't have the funds to pay a private attorney, we can also refer them to the North Carolina Legal Services, and they have a unit that does work with domestic violence victims. We have special laws to protect victims of violence or other serious crimes in addition to that. And Rona Karakova, who works there, has done amazing work in this specific area with law enforcement throughout the state. And I just hold her on a pedestal. With everyone they've hired there, has just been superb what they've done. And I've had a number of cases of domestic violence, and I've been able to help somebody as well. But I think of some of my fascinating cases, and there's been a lot. But one was a pro bono case I took on that I went to a conference in New Orleans, Immigration Lawyers Conference, and this article came out in the paper that day, and this lawyer that worked for the government in Washington was on one of my panels that I had helped plan. And Sunday morning, she said to me, "Cynthia, look at this. You got to do something." I said, "You're the government. You get on this." This man had been trying for years, he's from Cuba, to get his papers straightened out. He'd come here after the Cuban Missile Crisis. And back then, we didn't have special rules for Cubans exactly, but we had a parole provision where we were protecting Cubans from being sent back. We actually still have that. That man was going to be deported, but for that, because of a crime that he admitted to, which he said it wasn't mine. Ever hear that before? Well, this man, they found he was driving a friend in his vehicle to a parade. He was going to go to the parade, but before he got out of the place where they worked together, this guy said he needed a ride, and he had a little magazine with him, a physical magazine, like a gun magazine, a magazine, and he had something in it. And my client didn't know about the something in it, and he said, "I don't know what that is, but get it out of my car." And it was too late. He was stopped, and he was later charged and pled guilty to failing to pay tax on a marijuana cigarette. And that was what was going to get him deported. And this is in like 1961 or something. And so all those years he had this deportation order on his head. And he had gone everywhere to try to get this sorted out. And I looked at it and I said, that's not even a law anymore, I don't think. And it's not a conviction that would get somebody removed. So I was able, with the help of the lawyer that then worked for the government, I got the files, we opened the files up, and we got the case reopened and got the deportation order lifted. And the man was in his late 70s, almost 80 at that point. He'd gone through his whole life not having any identity documents, never able to travel, never able to do the things that, most of us take for granted. And we got his case reopened. And a few years later, just after Katrina, a lot of good things happened in the middle of all that. But he almost lost his house in Katrina. But he was finally decided he was going to leave and went to Texas when everybody else was told to leave. He waited. But he finally went, gets back, and we had been filing for his citizenship. And I was afraid the papers were lost because the government buildings were kind of a mess and everything. But all the connections that happened in that community around him, we ended up, a local reporter ended up putting this in the paper, and we got to see him become a citizen. And a couple of years later, he passed away, but he was never so grateful that I helped him with that from him. But I've had cases all along the way. Recently, we're working on getting a Vietnamese family back together that there was a misrepresentation at a consulate that was never intended, and he gets his papers, comes to the United States, and we've got to get him back in order because his wife is back in Vietnam with their baby child that he's never met, and we were able to get that lifted. These things are called forgiveness waivers, and so he got one, but now we're trying to get the baby and all joined up. So I do a lot of family reunification work and asking for forgiveness in what I do, but we do employment-based as well, and we're working on a few cases there. So it's a very varied practice, even though it sounds like a unified thing, immigration law, it's very complicated, but I very much enjoy it.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, well, what we do a lot is a lot of people basically are usually in the throes of. I give example. Let's say I had a client who basically drove their car and they thought they had insurance. Their insurance had lapsed the day before they were in a car accident. And so they were in a car accident, and so they were a truck driver. And so if they didn't, so he would lose his license if he didn't work out something to fix this $10,000 repair job. And so one of the things he could do would be to file bankruptcy and resolve that issue for the Department of Transportation. And so we do that too. And in some cases, people have. It depends on what their assets are. Some cases, some people have to pay a certain portion of it, and some people. And this particular person I'm thinking of, they just filed Chapter 7 and were able to get rid of that obligation. Well, there's a lot of things that we do in terms of holding on to people's houses, especially in the 2008 to I think 2010 period. A lot of people got behind on their mortgages. They were losing their house, and we were able to hold on to their house and give them an opportunity to pay it off over a period of time. And so, without losing their property and without and sometimes people want to hold on to the house just long enough to sell it these days, to get an opportunity to sell it without being like a liquidation sale. What happens to some people these days especially is there's people that are trolling everywhere trying to, buy people's houses and so when people get in financial difficulty and they're getting a little bit behind on their house, they'll foreclose on them in a heartbeat because of the fact that they know they can get the value out of the house. And so, but when people start notifying you that they're going to foreclose on you, people start look for a deal. They figure that they could get a deal out of your house, even though it's important for you to get full price out of it in order to either get alternative shelter or to, or alternative shelter or to just because it's your house and you're entitled to get the full value out of it. So a lot of times we hold on to people's houses so they can basically do a fair market value sale of the house. We have a couple of people that they just want an opportunity to get a fair market value on the house, and we do that. And well, we don't sell the house. We just get permission for them to sell the house. Like I said, and we hold on to a lot of houses and a lot of properties that basically were going to be lost because people have gotten behind or something has happened. Sometimes and like I said, I was on the way to the zoo, I guess about a year ago, and I had a bunch of kids with me, and I had a bunch of kids with me, and it was somewhere between the zoo and here. I think it was somewhere in Cabarrus County, and actually I ran into one of my old clients who was saying he was so grateful. We were stopping at Bojangles. He bought everybody Bojangles. We were stopping at Bojangles for breakfast on the way to the zoo. And he bought everybody Bojangles. He was so great. He said he was so grateful for everything we did for him to try to hold on to his house. And he held on to his house, and everything is going good for him. And that's what we're looking for. That's what we're looking for. Hopefully, people hold on to their assets and are able to continue with their lives.
Very good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So to me, one of the privileges of being a lawyer is that you are invited into people's lives at very difficult moments, whether they're people dealing with housing issues or immigration or even businesses, believe it or not, because they're made up of people. I can think of sort of two things that to me illustrate that. The one was a pro bono case I did for legal services where an 82-year-old woman wanted to get divorced. And she wanted to get divorced from her husband who left her 50 years earlier to raise their kids. And I was a young lawyer, and I kept, why do you want to get, why go? It wasn't cost or anything, but it was work. She had to go to court. It was work. And she said she had not wanted to do it before because she was worried what her kids would think. But she, before she died, wanted to be divorced from this man who, by the way, no one knew if he was dead or alive or where he was.
Wow.
But we got the divorce, and I'll never forget walking outside with her, and she was just weeping and so grateful. And for her, that was this mountain that she had been thinking about for 50 years, and she accomplished it before she died, and how important that was and how lucky I was to be invited into her pain and her joy around that. Another case I can think of, and one when I'm talking to young lawyers, I talk about in that my client was a big, huge corporation suing their former partners, a family of people, and everybody made tons and tons of money. So it's quite different from this woman wanting to divorce, but the family, the partner of my client, had started embezzling and taking money that was coming into their joint operation and using it to do ridiculous things, buy art, big time art, Federal Express wedding invitations, just junk like that. So we had a 3-week trial in federal court right before Christmas. And the sort of lessons that I learned from that, and I'd only been practicing about 12 years at that time, was a couple things. One, justice comes in all kinds of ways and forms. And granted, that wasn't for the community a justice issue, except it was, in that if there's justice in my view, and it leads to other forms. The justice for my client was making these people accountable for the millions of dollars they'd stolen from them. But you have a jury of 6 people in federal court sitting there for 3 weeks before Christmas. Why would they care about this? So I felt like I learned a lot about jurors, and what I think is jurors take their jobs very seriously. Ricky, you know that. And people who come into it, they might be cynical about the justice system. They might think, how do I care about these corporations or whoever they're listening to in court? But, again, Ricky, I know we've talked, you watch these people and they become a player. They become their roles. It's amazing to watch. And this jury in my trial, I think, started out going, are you kidding me? This is what we're going to be doing? And by the end, when they heard the extreme things that had happened, it wasn't their justice issue, but it was in that wrong had occurred. The other lesson I get from this was courage. There was a whistleblower within the company who alerted my client to what was going on. Very fine young accountant. In between, when he contacted us and we had the trial, he was hospitalized and had a staph infection. This man left the hospital, came to the courtroom, testified when he was clearly not well. No one made him do it. He just did. And the saddest thing is he died. He went back to the hospital after that testimony. He died. But what courage about an issue that didn't seem to have resonance beyond these people, but in his world, this was what he had done his job ethically, honestly, and he witnessed this terrible criminal activity, basically, that had happened around him, and he wanted to see it through. And the third lesson I took from that, we had a 3-week trial which followed years of very diligent litigation, discovery, and testimony, depositions, and all that. But one of my best friends is the lawyer on the other side to this day. And I always tell young lawyers, again, or anybody, is that you can do your job as a lawyer and you can do it really well, and you can make a friend of your adversary, and you should, because you've got so much to learn from them and so many rich and rewarding relationships over the years. So those, for me, those 2 cases are illustrative of the joy I've had.
Boy, that's really interesting. Thank you. I have Jackie and then Ken.
I've enjoyed hearing all of your stories. But with this being Women's History Month, when you were a younger attorney, what challenges did you encounter that you thought may have been because you were?
I'll start since I'm right here. Hey, Yvonne. Here's what happened to me a lot. I would get a phone call from a client of one of my law firms, always a he, and he'd say, Alice, so-and-so tells me you're a bulldog, or some version of that. And I would know, why would someone tell you that? Because I know, I mean, Yvonne and Rick, you've seen, they know I'm not in there screaming and yelling and being ugly. That's not how I practice law. But in order for my partner to convince their client that I was a woman, but they had to say, she's a bulldog and she's aggressive, and I'm not. And so I never quite knew how to respond to that. And the challenge for me always was how to be who I was and yet convince people that I knew what I was doing. And I have to say, sometimes that's still a challenge, because I think despite the many wonderful women in this room, 2 women here who've been on the bench, despite all that, that stigma is still there, and it's just the challenge.
Okay. Well, I guess my first challenge came when I was in law school. I had a professor who said Mr. Upperman. That was my main name because he assumed it was always a Mr. He assumed it was always a Mr. At the time when my class came in, I think we had 11 women, and there was one bathroom for all the women at UNC. And everybody was, and they were saying, well, you could use there is a individual bathroom that the secretaries use. So if you get really desperate, you could go back there. So they always thought, well, we got a few women here. We're gonna work it out. But they didn't expect to have the next class that came in had 27 women. And so things were really changing. It was a period of change. And so you were a Black woman, and so you were really, really, really in the minority from the beginning, because there were only like a few Black people also in the school. When I got there, I had a distant cousin who was graduating, and he was in the class of 2 Black people, and there were no Black women in that class, and just him, Bernard Smith, and my cousin Leroy Upperman were the only people that were basically graduating, and it was just And so the combination of being a Black woman and being a woman are always challenging because you're a Black woman lawyer as opposed to just a lawyer. and it sort of defines you, quote, quote, like, okay, we don't expect as much from you. We don't expect as much from you. We don't expect things you to do your job. It's always something going on. The combination of that is always something, and it makes it sort of different. And like I said, when I came to town, every big law firm had one woman. All the big law firms had one woman. They had no minorities. It was about 4 years later that they all had one minority. But all of them had this one woman, and if they had their one woman, they weren't going to go out and get two women. It was kind of crazy. And like I said, about 5 years later, they had one minority because all these large firms did not hire. All the Black people I know were at least the government service, or they were working for legal services or something like that. But there were a few, and of course there were a few Black firms, but most people they weren't going to get hired. Didn't matter if they were the first in their class or the first in their class or the 100th in their class. They weren't going to get hired by large firms because they just didn't hire Black people. And they didn't hire women except for the one. So if they had their one, they weren't going to go to two until that woman left.
What year was this?
76. And so none of the large firms hired any women, hardly. And they definitely didn't hire, when I first got, they definitely didn't hire Black folks.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Miss Cynthia.
Not being a minority, but being from the North kind of put me in a different place coming to the South. And I thought that didn't mean anything until a couple of weird things happened. When I transitioned from the first firm I was in to the second one, I had this experience with an all-male law firm, and they wanted to know what would keep me from just getting married and getting pregnant. And they asked me that at the interview, and I thought, well, I'm not even dating anyone right now. My goal is to help immigrants. That's why I'm here. And I said, I don't even have any collateral except my bicycle. Would you like that? Hold on to my bicycle. But I was so stuck, and I told somebody that later on. He said, you could have sued him for that. I'm like, well, at that time, I just wanted a darn job. I didn't really care. And I wanted to do immigration law in the worst way. And the other thing that happened, these things are very quiet. You don't even know they're going on because you contact a government office and you have no idea what they're saying behind your back. Well, I would call the court in Atlanta because that's where I had to go to court. For many of the years I've been practicing, we didn't have a court in Charlotte. And I would call down and talk with the clerks, and they were all very woman friendly because I learned from my dad, who wasn't a lawyer, you don't act like you know what you're talking about. You always show your ignorance and be polite and just say, I don't know how this works. Could you please explain it to me? I'm new at this. So that was always what I remembered, and that's always what I did, and hold everybody in the highest respect. Well, I had to go down in person for the first time. And it was a cold day, and I went down to Atlanta and go in the building. I get there early in the morning, and I saw staff going in the lobby area, and I thought, oh, I wonder if they'll let me sit inside. I got this big suitcase here with my files, and I knocked, and the guy comes out, and he says, no, you have to stay out there. And so I just sat on my suitcase. And then one of the voices I heard was one that I'd heard on the phone, and she said, Cynthia, Mrs. Eves, what are you doing sitting out on the floor? I said, well, the other gentleman told me I couldn't come inside. And he said, I thought she was an immigrant.
Oh, my God.
And he himself was an immigrant. And I thought, okay, I never thought this would happen in a million years. Here we are in immigration court, which is part of the Department of Justice, and I'm being told I have to sit outside because I'm an immigrant. How about I'm a person? But so you never know where it comes from, and it doesn't matter what you look like or how you sound. There's just someone that's got something in their head, and so I just kind of don't play victim. Just got to move on and just take it as one of your life stories and never treat people that way.
Thank you. Cindy?
I remember first starting out really noticing the Good Old Boys Club at the courthouse.
Yeah.
I mean, it was very clear. It was very evident. The judges and the male attorneys were buddy-buddy, and you would see them coming out from the back together before cases are called. And I used to always wonder about that. And I remember one time I had what I thought was a fairly straightforward motion hearing on one particular issue in a case. It wasn't a trial. It was just one issue that we were arguing about in this motion. And there was a male attorney on the other side. And I expected the motion hearing might take 20 minutes, 30 minutes at the most. The judge, for whatever reason, I think maybe he was testing me, or maybe he was deferring to his male colleague, but we ended up arguing that motion for like 3 hours. And I just cannot imagine why the judge even allowed it to go on that long, because it wasn't necessary. But the judge did eventually rule in my favor. But I wondered about, why in the world did it take us 3 hours to do this? I mean, it just went back and forth over the same issues. I just thought it was the good old boy system. Or I was being tested. Let's see what this little young attorney can do. Another incident that I recall, and I agree with Sandra that people have these expectations about you, maybe low expectations about you because you're Black and you're female. And so I always try to be over-prepared for my cases. And I remember I was co-counseling a custody trial with one of my colleagues, and we had split up the witnesses. And I had been trained that whenever you make an objection, you state the reason for the objection after you object. And so we were going through the trial. The plaintiff's attorney was doing the direct of his client, and I was objecting and stating my reason for the objection. For example, I might say objection hearsay, or objection asked and answered, or objection, whatever the objection was, I would state it. And after a while, the judge interrupted me and said, "Ms. Patton, you don't have to do my job. I know what the reasons for these objections are." And so I just stopped stating while I was objecting, but I kept objecting. But I think he was offended by the fact that I was just telling him or stating the reason for the objection, so it's clear on the record about why I'm objecting. And there won't need to be an argument about why I'm objecting. He knows why I'm objecting, and he can either sustain it or overrule it. But I thought that was interesting that he just sort of stopped me and said, you don't have to do that.
Okay, thank you so much. Ken, I have one before you to say right here. Ken.
Do you find yourself seeing the world and hearing the world like you are an attorney? There's an attorney filter.
I'd say yes in many ways. I mean, I think my family would always accuse me of over arguing. And well, you just can do that because you're a lawyer. And I would say, well, I'm a lawyer because I can just do that. But I do think one of the things you learn as a lawyer is there are 99 times out of 100, there are two sides to a story. And you can always learn by listening to the other side. And so I'll hear somebody say, such and such, such and such, and I always wonder, what would I hear from the other side? And it just makes the world a little more interesting.
Okay. Anybody else?
I'm not clear about what you're saying, but you see the world differently because you're a lawyer. I actually I could say I don't, but because I always thought there were two sides to every story. I mean, when you hear if someone's presenting a story, they're always presenting the best story of their side. And so therefore, you always got to wait and find out what the other side is, because usually they're going to present the best story of their side. And so a lot of times you find out things that are holes in the first story.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that that I always believed was there before I was an attorney. Go ahead.
That's good. There's a couple things. I've been working with the same associate for 27 years, which is quite an honor to work with another attorney that many years in a small practice. But she always went into the thinking with a client was, I'm going to not trust you until you gain my trust. And Miss Little Naive was always the other way, which was, I'm going to trust you until you violate my trust. So that's kind of an evolution that happens to you over time, and that's not just lawyers that think this way. But that's one thing that kind of where do you get in the middle of that so that you're not so with your guard up as much. But the other thing I learned is someone comes into you with their side of the story, and you wonder, what possessed them to do that? Why would they have lied about their identity that many years? Oh my, I understand why. So you hear the rest of the story, because the government may be charging him with this horrific thing for giving false information and claiming to be a U.S. citizen. That's the worst thing you can do in this country, is claim to be a citizen when you're not. But what were the circumstances? So I'm always wanting to know what caused somebody to do that. Why did they do that act? So I kind of like that throughout my life, I think. Yeah, they did something stupid. But why did they do it? What were the circumstances that brought them to that point of desperation?
Okay, Cindy.
I agree with what Cynthia was saying, and I think Sandra said the same thing. I think it's been part of who I am even before becoming a lawyer, is just trying to understand people and why they do certain things, and arguing my side of the story. You know, if I have an argument to make, I'm going to make it. And I can remember when I was thinking about going to law school, family members said, oh yeah, you should definitely go because you like to argue. You know, so I just think it was part of my personality, really.
Okay, Ken and then Laura.
To my young reporter friend back there, this is when it gets really good. I used to cover the courts, and one of the things that I found interesting, especially back in the 70s, all of you are familiar with the law firm Chambers, Stein, Ferguson, Wallace, and Atkins. And they would consistently go into civil litigation and civil rights in particular, and just beat the dog mess out of some of these big white law firms. And ultimately, one of those law firms decided to cross the line and hire one of the colored boys to come over and work with them. And I believe that was Frank Emery that left the firm and went to Kennedy Covington, Lockwood and Hickman, or one of the other firms that Chambers.
Yeah, another firm. Yes.
Chambers used to beat them all the time. And so I find it quite amusing as I'm hearing these different stories. But my question is, which of you has ever yielded, deferred, or resisted to a male lawyer because the case was assigned to a conservative, anti-feminist lawyer? Or have you appeared before sexually biased judges or opponents? How you responded to that?
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah. I had a case one time in South Carolina. I was 6 months pregnant, and the judge did not like me, and he would, at every break, he would go into the chambers with the opposing counsel, and they would smoke cigars. Well, I certainly couldn't go around with cigar smoke because I was 6 months pregnant. He did everything he could to let that jury know that I did not know what I was doing, and the other lawyer was quite aggressive. My view has always been, have a jury. You know, we have better judges now, I think, for the most part. but you always have the jury. And to me, that was the democracy, and that was the thing that would help my client and help me. So I learned to and still do trust the jury, but it certainly has happened.
I know it's improper, but how that court ruled? Did that?
For me.
All right, good.
My client was right. The jury got that. And I also say the jury, I always talk to jurors after trials. They did not like, they could tell what was going on. They didn't like what the other lawyer was doing, and they didn't like what the judge was doing. That's not going to mean they rule, but it wasn't lost on them.
Okay. Did you want to?
Okay, well, whenever you deal with business lawyers, you deal with, a lot of times deal with some very conservative individuals. And generally when you're in bankruptcy, you're dealing with a lot of the creditors are usually business lawyers. You know, I had people that I knew were big Trump fans and and people that I knew that were big, just back in the day, Jesse Helms fans. And so you just deal with them. But I have found that generally you can find common ground with just about anybody, even the people that you quote would not normally hang out with because they're not. But I think that lawyers are generally conservative. It's a conservative kind of practice, and I think especially creditor lawyers are generally conservative. And I generally have pretty good relationships with most of them because you basically there's some common ground there, and you treat people you just treat people the best you can. And I don't usually have the judges thing. I have the same judges all the time, so I don't have the judges issue. But I have had judges that were before I started doing bankruptcies that were difficult. But I'm used to our judges in the bankruptcy court, and they from Judge Wooten to Judge Woodley to Judge Beyer to Judge they've always been great to work with. And so I haven't had the judges issue, but I have had some very, very conservative people on the other side who had, who basically you would normally not be affiliated with in a normal situation because they have a different view of the world.
Okay.
There's in administrative law, which is not exactly what I'm covered by under immigration courts, but it's a strange animal, the system that I work under. But there's a government attorney for the Department of Homeland Security, which used to be called the Immigration Naturalization Service Attorney. Well, I had this one case years ago that my client took what's called voluntary departure, and he decided not to show up at my office the day of the hearing, saying he was taking some kind of elective surgery. And I said, but you need to be there. Well, the judge decided to do the case without him, saying my client had given me permission to take this for him. So I had all the documentation in order that I had done this. Well, so he takes it, and then he chooses not to leave. So I'm in a bind, I'm in a mess. I'm like, great, okay, what if he comes back at me later on? He didn't leave. Now what do I do? Well, I had it covered. But then years later, he has another way to get his papers if he can just get his case reopened claiming that I was ineffective. So there's a way to prove that your lawyer was ineffective, then you can get your case reopened. So they were trying to say that I was ineffective because I wouldn't pursue his asylum claim. Well, I didn't think I had corroborating evidence to support his claim, and I had tried. I was fairly young in practice at the time, and I was making all these long distance calls to the consulate abroad at 2 a.m. and trying to find stuff to support his claim, but there was nothing I could find. And so I said, I'm not going to pursue that. You can go find another lawyer. And I had documentation to prove all of this. Well, this law firm out of DC files a motion to reopen, ineffective assistance of counsel, files a complaint with the state bar against me. I'm horrified. I'm like, that's it. My career's over. They're calling me ineffective. I did everything I was supposed to do. Anyway, they bring this thing, the judge in Atlanta, who is very conservative, denies the motion, and the government attorney, who's equally conservative and very arrogant against women and all kinds of things, he has to defend me and say I'm not ineffective. So they lose in front of the judge. Then they take it to the Board of Immigration Appeals. Then they go to the 11th Circuit. They lose there. And he's defending me the whole way. This guy that's ultra conservative and arrogant and nasty. And this same law firm tried to take it all the way to the Supreme Court. So I'm probably the only immigration lawyer in the country that has this decision that says from the Board of Immigration Appeals saying that I'm not ineffective, that went all the way up to the 11th Circuit, into the 4th, and to the Supreme, saying that I was not ineffective. So this same lawyer that had to defend me said, do you have a copy of that signed decision hanging in your office? And he would say that to me every time I was on the phone with a judge, and he was on the other side. So finally, I framed the darn thing and put it behind the closet door. But this is where you said you have to be respectful, and eventually he came to my aid when I needed him most.
Okay, Cindy.
I can't recall a time when I deferred taking a case because of a judge or opposing counsel. Honestly, at Legal Aid, we don't have that many resources. We don't have the ability to do that. But I do recall having a colleague once who worked with this lawyer in a family law matter, who had a reputation of being not very pleasant, arrogant, nasty. And she was in the midst of this trial, and he had really worn her down. And so she asked me to come second chair the case with her. And I did. And I think that was helpful to her. But the point I wanted her to make is you just go do your job. Don't be intimidated by this person because of their attitude. And I definitely was not intimidated by him. And some years later, I ended up having to have him on the other side of a couple of cases. And we ended up having a pretty decent working relationship because I did not let him intimidate me. And I remember in one particular case, which was a pretty bad case, it involved child sexual abuse, and his client was the alleged abuser. And we were talking to the judge in chambers in the back room about the case, and he actually conceded to the judge that my position was right and that the judge should grant my motion to not allow visitation between the abuser and the child. So you just have to stand your ground and do your job. That's the way I look at it, and be respectful of people, and things will work out.
Okay, thank you. As you can see, we're just about out of time, but we do have one more question. If it can be brief and brief, brief and brief. Okay, we have Ricky McCoy Mitchell.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here again. As I had an opportunity to say before, I've had the pleasure of working with actually all of you, both for the legal profession, but I would ask you, so that people actually get to see a broader perspective, that you've worked hard to get where you are in the legal profession. But I also know that each of you have raised challenges, been very persistent about your leadership at the bar and in the community, which is not always well received as women. And I think retired Superior Court Judge Yvonne Evans and I would agree that just because you're a judge doesn't mean we don't get those same kind of situations that arise too. So just to let people know what else that you're doing, because I think that makes a difference when we talk about women. With this community of bar.
Okay, you're involved in any community?
I'll start. So I actually met Ricky working in the bar first. She wasn't a judge for a while, and so we got to be good friends a long time ago working in the Mecklenburg County Bar, which does, in my opinion, a lot of really good community efforts. Throughout, I have always had a very active pro bono practice, and that's been very important to me, mostly in the landlord-tenant area, the housing area. I've been on the United Way board. I've been on several boards, mostly related to issues with children. And I have 3 kids of my own and have been involved with their schools. I've also done political things. I met Yvonne working on her first judicial campaign. and have always been very active politically. I get out campus. I register voters. That's always been my side passion, is being involved politically. And as lawyers, you get asked to do things. I've been a poll watcher a number of times, which they like lawyers to do. And in these times, that's become even more necessary. It's been a good opportunity to be involved in the community that I might not have had otherwise.
Okay.
Okay. I don't have a great resume of things I have done for particularly. I think that what I do for a living basically is helping the community, but I was on a couple boards, and I have been out canvassing at the bus station at the bus station during political campaigns, and I worked the Democratic National Convention when it was here for like 3 11-hour days. But I can say that probably I'm not on as many boards as I probably maybe should be. But that's pretty much what I did.
Okay.
It's not about just boards. I'm saying that you do a lot of
Ricky.
Yeah.
Ricky.
I'm sorry.
That's true. Well, I do some presentations. I have been on, call lawyer, a couple call lawyer or something, and I'm like right now I'm working on the diversity committee with the bankruptcy bar and local bankruptcy bar. There's a few things I'm doing. Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of what I do volunteer relates to what I do for a living. I've been on a couple of boards, the Justice Center in Raleigh and the International House here in Charlotte, which I'm very proud of. Done a lot of volunteer work with them over the years. But I've also, one of the things I didn't mention is I never wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a teacher. And my mom told me back then, well, you can go to the state school if you want to be a teacher, like it was a bad thing back in New England. And I said, I still want to do that kind of stuff, so I like to tutor. So I finally got the last 6 years I've been tutoring at Druid Hills, which is a real joy. And I do a lot of volunteer work through our church, St. Peter's. We have a justice ministry. And I do a lot of educating and mentoring through the immigration bar and the county bar.
Very good. I'm a teacher, so. Okay, Steve.
Lately, I have not that involved in the community either. My job has been so consuming. I think that's where I've been spending most of my energy. And for a period of time, I had some parents who were elderly that I had to deal with. But I have in the past been involved with the Mecklenburg County Bar doing volunteer work. I volunteered with Habitat for Humanity. I work with Sandra Little on the Diversity Committee of the Bankruptcy Bar, helping with the bankruptcy CLE committee for a while. Was at one point on the board of the North Carolina Association of Women's Attorneys. That was many, many, many years ago. But I have also lately been involved a lot in the political arena too, particularly with voter protection over the past 8 years or so. And I do enjoy that, and I do intend to keep doing that going forward in the future. I think that's important work.
Okay, I do want to recognize the Honorable Ricky McCoy Mitchell and the Honorable Yvonne Mills Evans, and they are both retired or active. Are you still active? Judges here. And I also wanted to just recognize the late Parks Helms. He passed away recently, and he was a real force here in Charlotte. Okay, he was an attorney also. So we really, really appreciate you being here today. This is so interesting. And I really try to keep to our time when it's 10 o'clock. We do have an announcement, Jackie.
Yes, I would like to judge Ricky McCoy Mitchell and Ted Follett and several other folks who helped to assemble this panel. Thank you so very much. And also to thank you for bringing in the refreshments today.
Oh, yes, she brought some refreshments in. Ricky McCoy, you can get those on your way out. But we do thank you. Who do we have next? We got next week.
We have Steve Crump will be doing a documentary.
That's yes, that is wonderful. We have Steve Crump, and a lot of you know him from Channel 3. He's going to be here with a documentary.
Yes.
Okay, so please come back. We appreciate you, and we are now over. Oh, you had okay. Ken has an announcement.
I'd just like to let all of you, mostly seniors, know that a dear friend and former colleague of mine passed, and Janet Bowles Eagle, who's thank you for the speech, just 2 days ago, Alzheimer's.
Oh yes, she did. That's right.
My
daughter
was so sad.
Quickly announce, if you haven't heard about the Congressional Art
She was in
Competition that will be conducted this year. And I am representing Congressman Jeff Jackson's office. I recently joined the district team as the senior district advisor. And I've sent that information to the school districts, but also to the trade groups for the private schools and public charter schools. But I'll send the announcement to you, Steve, so that it can be included in the announcements.
Okay, another announcement.
One quick announcement. Good morning, everyone. I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator for Mecklenburg County Courthouse. We have brought back court camps. I'm not sure if you're all familiar with court camp or not, but it's been down since the pandemic. And if you could please spread the information for us. We're really having a hard time getting the numbers for some reason. So court camp is, there's 2 sessions in the summer in July. We have signed up until April the 10th. We can always extend that, and it's $125 each week. But we have scholarships. So if a child cannot make it for some reason, we have a scholarship opportunity, so they don't have to try to come out of pocket. So if you guys could really push this in the community, we would really appreciate it.
Are there any other announcements? Okay, we are adjourned.
We lived in Mexico for a year.